Maduro has just been arrested and transported to New York. Venezuelan people immediately took to the streets to celebrate one after another. What exactly has this Venezuelan president done to arouse such intense hatred among his people? And why has the United States chosen this exact moment to take action against the president of a sovereign state? Today, from a macroeconomic perspective, I will uncover the hidden truth behind this incident for you to figure out why the public resents the president. We can start by looking at the country's current economic situation. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world and a population of 30 million, yet its economy has long since collapsed completely. According to a 2024 report released by the United Nations, 82% of the country's population lives in poverty, among which 53% are trapped in extreme poverty, unable to afford even basic food expenses. Currently, Venezuela's inflation rate stands at a staggering 172%, and its unemployment rate has soared to 35%. But surprisingly enough, these economic figures are actually considered an improvement for Venezuela. As far back as 2016, Venezuela's inflation rate surged past 481.5%. In 2017, that number skyrocketed to 1,642.8%. By 2018, the inflation rate hit an astonishing 130,060%. In 2019, in this country of 31 million people at the time, 4 million people were forced to flee their homes and become economic refugees. Behind all this chaos lies an inextricable link to President Maduro as the country with the world's largest oil reserves. Venezuela once sat on a sea of oil wealth, swimming in riches. Between 2000 and 2013, Venezuela's economy grew at an average annual rate of 3.5%, and its per capita GDP jumped from $4,800 to $12,000. During this period, the Maduro administration rolled out a host of welfare policies, cutting the national poverty rate from 23% down to 5.8%. On the surface, the country seemed to be thriving, but the cost behind this prosperity was extremely heavy. In Venezuela's fiscal revenue, the share of the oil industry surged dramatically from 37 to 86%. Whenever oil prices fluctuated, the national treasury had to rely on borrowing foreign debt and printing money recklessly to ease the pressure. By 2015, Venezuela's foreign debt accounted for a whopping 99.8% of its GDP, and inflation followed suit, soaring to record highs. To make matters worse, international oil prices plummeted from $93 per barrel in 2011. Venezuela, which was overly dependent on oil revenue, saw its balance of payments fall into severe imbalance overnight. To maintain its high level of welfare subsidies, the government had no choice but to print money, like there was no tomorrow. The money supply in the market kept growing. The national economy thus collapsed. After society descended into turmoil and chaos, the Maduro administration had to rely on the military to maintain the most basic social order. Tensions between the public and the government escalated accordingly. Venezuela's tragedy was thus, now, as people take to the streets to celebrate, they even thank Trump for solving their long-standing problem. But little do they know, Trump's arrival will bring them even bigger troubles. This arrest operation, from start to finish, took less than 3 hours in total, with a meticulously planned operation. Trump put on a high-profile display of strength to the world, and the reason he did this boils down to 3 core objectives. The first objective is to plunder Venezuela's oil resources, to ease America's sky-high debt crisis. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, but due to previous U.S. sanctions, its oil production capacity has long been severely restricted. Now Trump plans to take direct control of Venezuela's oil industry and let American oil giants move in to seize premium oil field resources and ramp up oil production to maximum capacity. Once millions of barrels of cheap oil flood the international market, international oil prices will most likely collapse after oil prices crash. America's domestic inflation problem will naturally ease. With inflation coming down, the Federal Reserve will have a legitimate reason to slash interest rates aggressively. The multi-trillion-dollar U.S. debt crisis can also be resolved in an instant. What Powell spent 3 years failing to accomplish, Trump pulled off overnight. With just a few helicopters, the second objective is to recoup past losses from Venezuela with interest. Long before the 2010s, Venezuela already knew it was sitting on abundant oil, but at the time, the country lacked mature drilling technology and had to attract European and American oil companies to help with exploration and extraction. As professional oil companies, including American ones, entered the country one after another, Venezuela's vast oil resources were successfully tapped. This once impoverished agricultural country, which ranked at the bottom of the economic ladder, quickly transformed itself into a major oil exporter. But after 1943, the Venezuelan government felt it was getting too small a slice of the oil profit pie and introduced a new oil law requiring foreign oil companies to pay an additional 50% income tax. This policy seriously harmed the interests of oil companies from various countries. But at the time, it was during World War II when global demand for oil was sky high. European and American countries had no choice but to back down and compromise. However, this compromise did not bring long-term. In the years that followed, the Venezuelan government continued to squeeze foreign oil companies. In 2007, Hugo Chavez, the country's leader at the time, announced that all foreign oil companies must sell 60% of their shares to the Venezuelan government, and offered an extremely low purchase price. When foreign companies resisted this demand, the Venezuelan government simply seized them without compensation, and even sent troops to take over all uncooperative foreign oil companies. From that point on, the United States and Venezuela have been at odds. Now that Maduro is under arrest, Trump can take this golden opportunity to demand that Venezuela compensate the U.S. for its losses with full interest. The third and most core objective is to curb China's development momentum. On one hand, China is Venezuela's largest trading partner, and also a key economic cooperation partner of China in Latin America. On the other hand, Venezuela has signed an oil for loans cooperation mechanism with China, and a large portion of bilateral trade is settled in RMB. In the crude oil trade between China and Venezuela, the proportion of RMB settlement has exceeded FE. This means that some trade between China and the U.S. has bypassed the U.S. dollar system. When oil is no longer traded exclusively in U.S. dollars, the very foundation of the dollar-dominated global monetary system will be shaken. If international trade in bulk commodities such as crude oil gradually abandons dollar settlement, then Trump's worst nightmare will come true. He doesn't care at all that Venezuela has abundant oil resources, nor does he mind the quality of the oil. What he truly fears is that oil transactions will break away from the dollar system and instead deepen cooperation with China. Now you understand all of Trump's objectives. You might be wondering, has he achieved all these goals? Next, we will analyze them one by one in terms of plundering oil resources. Trump personally gave the order for major American oil companies to move into Venezuela and start operations. At present, the top FE oil companies in the United States have all set up shop in Venezuela, scrambling to seize market opportunities. In terms of recovering losses, Venezuela's interim president, Rodolfo Guedes, has made it clear that he hopes to expand cooperation with the United States in more areas. In due course, it won't just be oil resources, but also the rich mineral resources in Venezuela that will all fall into America's grasp. As for China's interests in Venezuela, Trump claimed on the surface that U.S. oil business in Venezuela does not conflict with China's interests. If China wants to buy Venezuelan oil, the U.S. is also willing to resell it to China. These words sound amicable enough, but in reality, they have completely disrupted China's strategic layout in Latin America. However, for China, this loss is still within the acceptable range. Ever since Russia was kicked out of the SWIFT system in FE, China has established RMB oil settlement systems one after another, with countries like Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. By the end of Fei of global oil trade no longer uses the US dollar for settlement. The figure of Fei may not sound like much, but it is worth noting that this ratio barely exceeded Fei back in Fei. If China is given another 5 years, the US dollar monetary system will face the most severe test in its history. So from a long-term perspective, although the US seems to have scored a major victory with this operation against Venezuela, it will need to take more follow-up actions in the days ahead. That wraps up the content of today's video. If you enjoy my work, feel free to follow my channel. In the next video, I will continue to use a macroeconomic lens to help you see through the elaborate schemes behind politics and capital. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for watching.